Well, hello there. How are you guys doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review. My name is Rob, and today we're going to talk about Nintendo Switch games versus Nintendo Switch specs. So specs versus games, games versus specs, Nintendo Switch this, Nintendo Switch that. It is a freaking madhouse out there on the internet and on YouTube and all over the place because we're all trying to figure out what's happening with Nintendo, what's happening with their next console, the Nintendo Switch, which of course we know will finally be revealed to us in detail in January, which is just a few weeks away from the recording of this video. Very exciting time. We know Sony just released their brand new PlayStation Pro. We know that Microsoft is making their Xbox Scorpio next year. I recently made a video discussing sort of the relationship between the Switch and the Scorpio and how they might be influencing the gaming industry and the landscape of gaming and the generations. There's so much going on. It's really exciting. But with this excitement comes a lot of, I don't want to say turmoil, but just a lot of rumors and guessing and theories, and sometimes people get very emotional, passionate, and heated, sometimes in good ways, and sometimes in not so good ways, to be fair. And there's been a lot of conversation going on the last couple of weeks, hence some of the videos I've even made myself on the channel and discussed as well about what's going on with the Switch and whether or not the power level of the Switch, the innards, the architecture, what makes up the console is going to be living up to what people really want from Nintendo, what people are expecting coming off of the Wii U, knowing that it's going to be falling more in line, ideally, with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, wondering what the Scorpio is going to do once that power level comes out to all of us. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on with the Nintendo and the Switch. So I decided to do what I like to do every once in a while, and I went to Twitter. I created a poll where I asked you guys to basically vote on what you think is, for yourself, more important for the Nintendo Switch to make you happy or to make Nintendo more successful. The specs and the power of the Nintendo Switch or the games and the library of the Nintendo Switch. So I had everyone vote on that. And then I also asked everyone to kind of tweet me a response and further elaborate on why you decided to vote the way you did and why you feel the way you do so that I could kind of feature it in a video, again, as I do like to do, give you guys shout outs, show your tweets, discuss them a little bit, and ultimately tell you guys exactly how I feel and what I'm looking at when it comes to the Switch. So of course, these are always a lot of fun to do. I love being able to interact with you guys in this way. Of course, if you do want to be part of these conversations when I have them, you are more than welcome to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I am far more active on Twitter, and I never really pump these things. I do use Facebook, but it's really Twitter that I'm super active on, and it's where I usually pull these question and answer kind of scenarios from and get to feature them in videos here. So if you're interested and you're not following me on Twitter or Facebook, you definitely should. Links are always in the description of all of my videos. And what was cool about this one was including the poll. So I could kind of gauge how everyone felt based on the poll and then discuss everyone's tweets and then my ideas on the Switch, specs versus games sort of idea that I'm discussing with you guys today. Now, the thing is, I was going to wait for the poll to be completed tomorrow. However, this poll turned out not at all like I expected. I'm kind of happy with it, but it's basically a landslide. As of the recording of this video, the poll on what you guys prefer, specs or games for the Nintendo Switch, looks like this. Holy freaking crap, look at that. Devastation. I mean, it is a landslide like I've ever seen. So basically, per the poll and the voting, everyone vastly prefers the games to the specs, which, hey, that's a great thing. I have no problems with that. Very surprised to see it being so lopsided. Oh my God, that's insane, you guys. But what's cool is the tweets that you guys responded with kind of tell a different story. And so it really helped me understand that this was probably a really cool experiment to do because you get the base just clicking of a button, yes, this or yes, this. But once you get the tweet with kind of the elaboration, it gives you more insight into what people are thinking and how people are making up their minds. So we're going to get started with the first tweet here, go through a few of these. And then again, like I said, I'll discuss kind of how I feel at the end of this. It should be noted before I get started with the tweets that this video isn't really about telling anyone that they're right or they're wrong or saying these people are right who feel this way and these people are wrong who feel this way. No matter how you feel, whether you prefer one or the other or don't even care and you just prefer them both equally, which there were a lot of people, by the way, who felt that way, that's fine. That's great. I mean, I have my own preference and my own idea of what I think is most important and what I would also prefer. But at the end of the day, this isn't about saying anyone's right or wrong. This is just to kind of give you guys a voice, the people a voice who voted and tweeted at me, and then to discuss my opinion. So just so everyone knows, this ain't about calling anyone out. That's just not how I roll. So the first tweet from today comes from someone who I just interacted with for the first time. OJ at the Awesome Player Essence channel just last week was cool enough to feature me on one of his podcasts. I got to do that with a bunch of great people. OJ, thank you so much. I will link that below for you guys to check out. It was a lot of fun. And on that, I also met a fellow named Usman who has a channel. I think his channel name is Usman. He kind of was making fun of that in the podcast. And it's a really cool up and coming channel. You know, he's doing really good work, and I know it's growing all the time. And so, Usman, it was cool to be on the podcast with you, and it's great that you responded here and gave me our first tweet for the day. So, again, Usman, at UsmanAZ6 on Twitter says, well, it goes hand in hand. One is pointless without the other. If one was decent and one was amazing, I prefer games. So he's basically saying that in a lot of ways, the games and the specs sort of feed off of one another and kind of help make the other one better. And I definitely can't disagree with that. I think it's an interesting perspective. But at the end of the day, he says if they were both kind of on par, he would end up choosing the games. So to him, the games are what's most important. Our next tweet comes from a fellow named Chris LAU. I don't know if it's Law or Lau or short for something, at Chris LAU90 on Twitter. And Chris, you might be a Chris that I know and interact with a lot on Facebook or have in the past. I don't know if you're that Chris. If you are, what's happening? And if you're not, thanks anyway for tweeting me and responding so I can read it today. So Chris said, of course it's the games, but specs equal third-party support. So I find that one interesting because Chris also says he prefers the games to the specs overall. And by specs, I mean power. I should give that preface. You know, specs and power are kind of the same thing here because I don't really understand specs and what all the numbers and letters and all that stuff means. I just understand power, and that's basically what the specs are representing. So he says he prefers games to the specs or power, but he does basically say that specs equal third-party support. He's saying that the third-party companies that have been so on and off with Nintendo, mostly off over the last couple of years, part of the thing that's probably been holding them back is the relatively lacking power of the Wii and the Wii U. And I do think that there is absolutely some truth to that, if not a lot of truth to that. There obviously were a lot of things that led to third parties not being so hip to Nintendo with the Wii and the Wii U. A lot of factors, but I think no doubt one of the biggest would be the fact that each system was relatively underpowered compared to its competition. So I definitely think that Chris is onto something there. So Furious Rants, at Furious Rants 16, says, specs are actually more important. You wouldn't even be able to play the system without the specs. So interesting perspective and interesting tweet that I don't, really know that I can totally disagree with. What Furious Rants is saying is that the specs power is what makes up the system. I think that he or she is getting at that the machine itself needs what it needs to be able to run games. So if Furious Rants had to pick between specs or games, they're going to pick the specs because to them, the specs just basically means the machine itself, the console itself. I think there's a little bit more to what the specs actually are, but I still get what you're getting at, Furious Rants, so I appreciate the tweet. I know where you're coming from. At the end of the day, it sounds like you really prefer those specs. On Twitter, Nate Crack, at Sergeant Crack, which is a freaking hilarious, awesome name, says, games are more important. You can have all the great specs and pretty-looking games, but the substance has to be there. I really like that tweet and that answer, so thank you so much, Nate, Sergeant Crack. I really appreciate what you're getting at there, and basically what Nate is saying is, pretty games, great graphics, beautiful art direction and all this stuff. It's nice. It's certainly a good thing to have, but at the end of the day, if the game isn't fun and if the game doesn't keep you engaged or, like Nate says, have substance to it, do the good graphics even matter? And that is definitely a great point, and there is a lot about that I agree with. So ultimately, Nate is saying he prefers the games. Sammy at 227grayman on Twitter has a tweet that's kind of hard to read, actually. I had to look at it and read it a couple of times here. The sentence structure isn't 100% in a way that I can follow, so I'm going to do my best. We can still get an idea of what Sammy is saying here. So, Sammy says, games. Specs are important for devs, but we don't have to care about specs because they can give us the games on the Switch if the specs are there. That's the best I can do with that. It started off strong, Sammy, and then it kind of fell apart in the last half. It was hard to really pick apart what you're trying to say, but we can get the idea of what you're saying. You prefer the games to specs. You feel that the specs are more important to developers, which is echoing the treat? Oh, who doesn't love a treat? It's echoing the tweet that I read a couple back where somebody said that the specs equal third-party support. So you guys are kind of on the same page saying that the third-party developers in the industry, they are looking for power and higher specs for machines to be able to make their games. And I've said that before, so you guys have a sentiment that I definitely agree with in a lot of ways. I like a huge theory I've had about the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox Scorpio is I think a lot of it came from pressure from developers in the industry to say, hey, we need more than what you're giving us. PCs are where we're focusing on, and, we're holding back a lot of what we're doing because your systems, even the PS4 and Xbox One, aren't cutting it. I think there were many other factors, and I don't even know if that's true. That's just been my own personal theory, but I feel pretty good about it. So that echoes what's going on here. Specs are important. Specs and power are important to third-party developers. But at the end of the day, still, Sammy comes down on the side of games. Justin Gonzalez at Quadipop says, games are amazing, but without specs, you wouldn't be able to run those games. So an interesting theory that is definitely not entirely wrong. Ultimately, what Justin is saying is power, specs, what actually the innards that make up a machine, you need those to play games. So games are great, but you need to be able to actually play these games. So at the end of the day, Justin is saying the games are great, but it's really the specs and the power in the machine that make the difference. Doomed Since 1889 at Doomed Since 1889 says games are most important. It can still have awesome games even with lower specs than the competition. So that is also an excellent tweet that I really, really like because it is 100% true. Just look at the Wii or the PlayStation 2 even. There's a couple of examples throughout the years and generations where that's the case. The Wii is a really excellent one because the difference in power between the Wii and the two competitors at that time was significant. I think the biggest gap we've ever had. I mean, yes, the PlayStation 2 was much weaker than GameCube and Xbox, but not by a whole lot, especially compared to the GameCube. There wasn't this huge disparaging difference. The Wii is a great example of a really underpowered system that was still standard definition compared to the very high-powered, high-definition internal hard drive having PS3 and Xbox 360. There's a big difference there, but the Wii sold far better and did have amazing games despite not having the power to back it up. So I liked what Doomed Since 1889 is saying here because he or she is basically saying, any system of any power can still make games that are fun and worth playing and worth buying. And I definitely agree with that. So that's a really, really great tweet as I tongue twist myself to death here. Somebody who's been recently very active with Rule of Two Review, especially on Twitter lately, which I super appreciate. And hopefully I'm going to say this right. Vigelis Carpetus. It sounds kind of like Latin, but he goes by @GreekHillian on Twitter, so maybe it's Greek, and I don't know that. Anyway, so I'm going to call you GreekHillian because that's easier to say. So Greek says, really want a powerful machine, but without games, it's useless. I prefer slightly watered-down versions than no version at all. I think that's a great tweet as well. There's some really good stuff that you guys had to say today. And I appreciate that because he's basically admitting, hey, I want power. I want good graphics. I want high specs. But I don't really care if the games aren't going to be worth it. And if we can get a system that has less power, but we still get games that are maybe don't look as good, but they're still the games that are releasing on the other systems, he would rather have those than nothing at all. And I think that there's absolutely something to that. I basically agree, as a huge Nintendo fan that also loves my third-party companies and third-party games, I think that there's a lot to that. So that was a really great tweet. I got to stop saying great tweet. That's just what I want to say. That's a wee great tweet. That is a really great tweet. The Blackbird64 at the Blackbird64 says, a weak system with good games is worth more than a powerful system without games. Games are why you buy a system after all. Very interesting when you look at today's landscape with how well the PlayStation 4 sold for so long, and I love my PS4, but man, the first 2 years were not good. They were barren, not a lot of games, but it sold like crazy. What is going on with that? But regardless of that, what he's saying is, hey, a weak system can still play really great games, but a powerful system might not have any good games. Coming from BoxBlock Gamer at BoxBlock Games, which is another tongue twister of all the tongue twisters on this video, says something very short and simple. You need good specs if you want good games. So there you go. Someone else who's definitely siding with specs. And that's a really tough one because that is so cut and dry. And I think that there's a larger conversation to have about the idea of good specs automatically equal good games. That's kind of what that tweet is saying. I get where it's coming from. And obviously this conversation is about graphics and specs and power are nice to have. They do sometimes make games great. and great games are very important, but if the system isn't powerful enough, you might not get some of the good games you want, i.e. the third-party conversation, and if they would even make games for a system that doesn't have a lot of power or good specs. Very interesting perspective there. That's not without any merit, but it might be a little bit too simple for me to totally jump on board with. And the last tweet I'm reading today is from Dave at Neo Supreme M? Wow, I thought it said Neo Superman until I almost said it out loud. We're going to go with Neo Supreme M. Anyway, Dave says, I would like for Nintendo to create a very powerful console, very powerful system like the old days, but the reason I buy Nintendo is their games. So, someone else who comes down on the side of games saying, and even similar to the one I just read from Greek Hillian, still acknowledging a powerful system would be great. Nintendo used to be at the forefront of technology and power, and it would be nice to have that back. I totally agree. But if you had to pick, it's still Nintendo's games that sell Nintendo hardware and sell Dave and a lot of other players, including myself, on the experience of a Nintendo console. So at the end of the day, Dave appreciates power and wants it, but would much rather have great games. So there's the conversation started. There's a bunch of tweets from you guys. So giving a voice to the people, like I said at the beginning, people have a lot of different aspects. And again, there were many people that said they find both to be equal. So shout out to that whole idea that I didn't have represented today because it would have been too many tweets to do the whole thing with. And there were a lot of tweets I just couldn't get to. Yeah, so at the end of the day, everyone has a different angle and everyone has a different perspective. There are more people here who wanted games, and again, if anything, the poll showed that for sure. But there's still a conversation people are having about when specs matter, why having a system that can run games is important, why the industry at large prefers and cares about specs. Third-party companies and third-party developers need certain levels of power to make their games available and to make them run. All these different things are coming from this conversation and a lot of the tweets you guys shared with me today. So what do I think? Where do I stand with this whole thing? Well, I'm going to echo what a couple of people said here. And a lot of you guys probably know this. I do love great graphics, and I do love powerful consoles and powerful hardware. It gets me excited. I like the idea of, this graphics card is the best, and these visuals look like this, and this refracting god rays of glory look like this, bouncing off of water into the glass as a rainbow shoots out from a unicorn's face. Like, I like to say and see all those things in my video games, absolutely. And when it comes to Nintendo and the Switch, I so want to be shocked and learned that this thing is really powerful and extremely capable, more so than the Xbox One, maybe even as powerful or more powerful than a PlayStation 4, as I also discussed recently. And a lot of people are discussing. This specs and power conversation is all over the place right now, and it's part of what made me want to put this poll out and then make this video. So I want that stuff. I love powerful machines and I love powerful Nintendo hardware. However, in my opinion, just like a lot of folks here are saying, and that poll says, to me, the games really make the difference because someone even said this, a powerful machine doesn't necessarily have great games, but a weaker machine, or an underpowered machine absolutely has shown us in the past the ability to also have great games. And yes, that can happen on powerful machines. Obviously, the win here would be if very powerful machines have very great games. That's the ultimate win. And that does happen. It is happening. It has happened in the past. It's been Nintendo in the past. But if I had to focus on what I'm more concerned about with the Switch going into the reveal and going into the launch and what I'm expecting from the next 3, 4, 5 years from Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch, I want the games. I want to know that third-party companies have what they need to release their games for sure. That is so very important to me, and I think it should be important to Nintendo too. I think it is important to Nintendo. I think that they're showing that they care about that. I've talked about many times the infographic they released with all those third-party developers. We've seen Bethesda, we've seen Skyrim, we've seen NBA 2K, we've seen the Seasons of Heaven thing. There's indies are on board. Like, there's a lot going on that shows Nintendo does care about the third-party support. I care about that. So to me, when I think about the specs and the power of the Nintendo Switch, I think, wow, I hope that they're really high. Not for myself, but so, like a lot of you guys said, the third-party developers who make so many of the games that I love and want to play on my Nintendo console will see that the Nintendo machine that exists does have the specs and power that is powerful enough to make them feel like they should release their games on that Nintendo console. I want that because I want those games. But there's no doubt that these companies could make different games available on Nintendo's console that cater to the strengths of the machine and that are great. And that did happen on the Wii And that happened to a smaller degree, but it still did happen on the Wii U as well. And I want Nintendo's games to exist and to be great. And whatever Nintendo needs to make their games and their properties and their new IPs the best they can be and look the best and play the best and feel the best as we play them, that's what I want the Switch to be. That's what I want the Switch to have inside of it. Whatever Nintendo needs. I feel like that's the strongest foundation specifically for a Nintendo console. Make it the base level that Nintendo requires to make their games great, and everything else will hopefully follow suit. It kind of happened with the Wii. It did not happen with the Wii U, so there is a precedence for when that doesn't work. But I still believe that Nintendo can come out of those dark days of the Wii U, where it didn't work, and they can make it work again like they did in the past with the 64 and the GameCube and the Super Nintendo. Yeah, the GameCube is in there. I know it wasn't as successful, but it wasn't like a huge disaster, and it's still very much known as a great machine with great hardware and amazing games. It kind of had everything going for it, and I think that Nintendo can emulate that again, even with what happened with the Wii U, by making other choices that they didn't make properly with the Wii U. That's where I think Nintendo is right now. So, in wrapping this whole thing up, make no mistake, both of these things are important. You know, a lot of Nintendo fans will want to maybe downplay the importance of power and specs. And I think that that's also a dangerous territory, you guys. I prefer my games to power, absolutely. I prefer fun games to pretty games. I prefer great gameplay to beautiful graphics. But we live in a world where the specs and the power and what's happening with the Switch is important. It does matter how it stacks up to a degree to the competition. So it's not like Nintendo can throw that out the window and say, power and specs doesn't really matter. Like, you can't do that. So we can't downplay how important they are for sure. But at the end of the day, a powerful system would be nice. But if the games come with it, you guys, if Nintendo brings the games and if the third parties bring the games alongside of it, however Nintendo makes that appealing to them with the Switch, I think that we're going to be okay. And it's going to help prove that we're at the point where the power doesn't matter like it used to. And it is the games that make a difference. You know, going from the 8 to 16 to 32-bit, the power and the graphics did make a difference because that was how games were getting newer and better, was just the graphics for so long. But then we started to hit a plateau around the end of the 6th generation and coming into the 7th generation where it was like, graphics are great and they're getting better and it's awesome, but at the same time, Nintendo was the first company to realize, like, the graphics hike can only last so long, and we need to start doing something different, and they did that with the Wii. And the Wii U was an odd step backwards, but I don't think that that's very characteristic of Nintendo and what they're doing and where they're going, and I think that the Switch is going to fix that. So at this point, I'm starting to repeat myself. I don't want to do that and beat a dead horse. At the end of the day, they both have a lot of value. I want to see them both in the Switch, but if I had to pick, personally for myself, I side with games and library. I want a stronger games library than I do power out of the Nintendo Switch. But hey, I still think we might get a decent level of both, you guys. And again, if you are somebody who prefers the specs and the power, you're not alone. A lot of people feel that way. This poll wasn't a good example of people agreeing with you, but look at some of the answers in the tweets that I shared with you today. And a lot of the videos being shared on YouTube. Like, there's a lot of people who feel that way as well. So no one is alone in this. At this point, now let's just wait and see. In a couple of weeks, Nintendo's going to show us all we need to know about the Switch. And then a couple of months after that, oh my freaking God, we're going to have Switches in our hands and in our homes. And then we'll really see what matters and what Nintendo is able to do with this crazy awesome looking new console. So, what do you guys think about this? Specs and power, games and library, what matters the most to you? You've heard some of your fellow folks on Twitter. You've heard from me on what I feel is probably most important for Nintendo to be focusing on and what I want. But what do you guys think? Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. Please share your thoughts about the specs and the games for the Nintendo Switch below. This, of course, is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you guys next time on another video.